Hey, what's going on, everyone? Awesome to see a bunch of you guys here already. I see that there's some comments, some questions already here. So, this is awesome. Let me know where you guys are watching from, where in the world you are. Always like to see that. Hey, Silvio, Roloff, Adam, Sean, Ryan. Welcome, guys. Welcome to this Hangout. It's been a while since I've done anything like this on YouTube, at least. What's going on? We got Giovanni from Arkansas, Dave from Hamilton, down the road from me, Matt from Ohio. Whoa, can't really keep up with these. Todd's from snowy Maryhill. Yeah, it's snowing outside right now. It's been snowing for like 2 days here. We got Oliver in Montreal. Low volume, guys. Is my mic too low? Let me try to crank it up here for you. Sorry if this blows you away. Let me know if this is better for you guys. Nice. Jonas from Nashville. We got some UK of China. Adam's over in England as well. This is killer. Yeah, hopefully my mic's, turn my mic up a little bit. You guys should be able to hear it good. Okay, this is awesome, guys. So we're going to jump into some questions. Hope you guys got some coffee. I'm actually lying to you guys right now because this is tea. Normally I'm a coffee guy, but I don't know. I just felt like some nice honey lemon tea today. So feel free to type in your questions, and I'll try to answer as best I can and help you guys as much as I possibly can here on this live stream for about the next hour. I was kind of thinking about something recently that I wanted to kind of just start off this stream by almost asking a question to you guys, which is about innovation in the pro audio world, the recording world. I feel like, when you look at industries like the movies and stuff, it seems like technology is just like growing like so rapidly, right? Like the way they make movies is, I feel like, completely changing every year, and everything's getting better and better and better. But you look at like the recording industry, it's like, the people who have been at the top of the game for like 40 years, they're still all using the same consoles and the same outboard gear, and people are, all the new plugins and new equipment is mostly trying to model the old stuff instead of like innovating the new stuff. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad or anything, but I was kind of thinking, like, I don't know if you guys can enlighten me as of some other companies who are really innovating in this world, but the only company I can really think of is Slate. And I'm not trying to pump their tires like crazy or anything, but I think that and I think of what they're doing with like the virtual mic system and their touchscreen Raven console thing. They come out with, like, say whatever you will about Slate and the company and all that stuff, or maybe there's things you don't like about them. That's fine. Again, I'm not trying to say their company's great or not, but what is true is they're the only company that I've seen that's actually innovating, like trying to change the way we actually record with the virtual mic system, changing the way we use consoles with the touchscreen and stuff. Like, it's crazy. I remember talking to engineer I was working with years ago, and we're kind of talking about this, like, what's going to be the next breakthrough? Like, there hasn't been any breakthroughs, right? There hasn't been any breakthroughs in music, and it's hard to even imagine what that would be, because we still just have two ears, and everyone's got headphones, and it's like, it's not like we can, people have thought that, surround sound and stuff that was going to replace as like casual listening, and that's, you can't really imagine that happening. But I think what will be awesome is, like, if the studio of the future is completely wireless. So instead of having to go into the live room and plug in the mic and then go and like plug it in the patch bay and plug it into the preamp and then patch that into your interface, if everything was completely wireless and just connected and talking to each other. So you had your mics all in the live room, you set them all up, and then on your computer screen in your DAW, you could just say, okay, I want this SM57. I'm going to click to patch that into this API preamp, and I'm going to click to patch that into the distressor, and that's going to go into this input. And you could do that all without like using any cables. It'd be all completely wireless. That's kind of like, that's my dream for the studio of the future. So I don't know. I find it fun to kind of think about this, but it's kind of crazy if you think about it, how there hasn't really been any major innovations in audio that I can think of for a while. But anyway, that's for my own enjoyment or pondering that I think is just interesting to think about. But you guys are not here to hear me talk about that. So let's get to some questions here. I'm going to try to scroll up in the chat. Let's see. Oh, you guys are giving some examples of innovative companies. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let me scroll up here and try to keep up here. It's kind of hard. So if I don't answer your question, guys, by the way, just like don't paste it over and over again in the chat, but you know, you can paste it like periodically, you know, again, if a few minutes go by and I maybe missed it, feel free to paste it again, because it's hard to kind of keep up and be scrolling back through everything. So let's go to Ryan's question. So he's saying, I edit and mix a lot of covers of popular songs that are not perfectly aligned to the grid, and currently quantize the drums manually using a click track as a grid that I'm required to slightly stretch measure by measure according to the song in order to get them to align perfectly with the transients that are in the song. I was wondering if you had any ideas to make this process easier. Let me read that again. Currently quantize the drums manually. Yeah, Ryan, I'm not quite understanding the question. Like, you're trying to match the original song that you're covering. You're trying to match that to a click. Is that what you mean? I'm just not quite understanding that question there. Oh, matching your drums to the song's BPM. Yeah, that's tricky, man. If I was trying to do that, I would probably just use something like Elastic Audio in Pro Tools or whatever you're using, and just kind of like record your drum parts as best you can, and then kind of manually try to edit the other tracks to that. I'm still not exactly clear. Yeah, the whole song's not perfectly aligned to the grid. I don't know if there would be an easy way to do that. I feel like that's kind of, I guess the other way you could do it is if there's clear transients in the original song itself, if it's not locked to a click, if there's clear transients, you can actually, at least in Pro Tools, you can get Beat Detective to analyze that and then create the tempo map based on those transients. So if it's kind of the tempo's going like this, you can actually get Pro Tools to create a tempo map like that, and then maybe you could edit your drums to that, or like play your drums to that click track that's varying. So that could be something. Okay, let's hit this question. Tragedy awaits us. I keep having phase issues with my rhythm guitars when I switch to mono. I try flipping the polarity on my gain plugin in Logic, but they still sound phasey in mono. I don't know what to do. So when you're saying phasey, you know, a lot of people have this question, and I heard this too, is that when you have your main left and right guitars panned out and you flip it to mono, it seems like it goes quieter, right? Your rhythm guitars seem quieter, so it's like, oh no, there's phase issues. It's canceling each other out. For the most part, this is like not really much of an issue. There are things that you can do in terms of kind of doing your EQ in mono to make sure that your mid-range of those guitars is like cutting through enough, because oftentimes, this is why mixing in mono is good, is because when you have things panned out wide, it gives the illusion of separation. So just because of the fact that your bass and your drums are like mostly up the middle, and your guitars are out here, they automatically sound big and separate. But if you stack everything on top of each other, it's like, that's actually, mid-range is not cutting through. The guitars are actually not cutting through at all. It's really just the panning that's giving me that illusion of separation. So that's why I like to do a lot of my EQing, not balancing, not stuff like that, but just EQing with the mono button in, so that I can hear how everything's like stacking up against each other, and that I can try to find the mid-range frequencies to boost that's going to help those guitars actually stand out more. So that's just kind of a tip of something. If you're finding your guitars are kind of getting quieter when you go to mono, that's number one, that's normal, don't panic, but that could be something to do your EQ in mono. If they're actually phasing and like giving you like a whirly, like wonky sound, it could be, it's very rare, but it could be that if you track or edit your guitars like so tightly to the grid that they can actually be so close that it does kind of start to cancel out or create some weird phase stuff. So yes, you need it to be really tight and really precise, but if you go overboard, you can actually start collapsing the sound and getting maybe phase issues. Again, it's kind of rare, but it could be that maybe you're over editing. I'm not sure without seeing your exact scenario there, but in that case, then obviously the answer would just be to allow a little bit more breathing space so that it stays wide. John Worms asking the best 3 plugins for Guitar Bus. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I actually I do route my guitars all to a guitar bus, but I don't process on the bus. I generally don't do much top-down mixing, especially for like guitars and stuff and vocals. I do all my processing on the individual guitar tracks. And in that case, usually I have a EQ that's doing some just filtering, high and low pass filtering, notching out some harsh frequencies. Then I have another EQ that's maybe doing some boost if it needs it. I try not to really process rhythm guitars much with EQ at all though. And then compressor, I love the, for the EQ, I love the SSL channel. And for the compressor, I love the CLA 3A. That thing is awesome. If you go to like the electric guitar preset and then get it doing like, I think around 5 dB gain reduction, sounds great on guitars. But yeah, I don't really process on the bus, man. Okay, AP350 is asking, what's the minimum amount of mics you recommend for recording drum sets, a drum set, and cymbals? The minimum amount. Okay, so for rock, heavy music, anything, let me count. I'd have a kick inside, snare top, snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, if there's 2 toms, a hi-hat. Well, you're saying minimum, so let's maybe get rid of the hi-hat. 2 overheads. So that's 7. I'd say that would be the minimum. Kick in, snare top, snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, and then the 2 overheads. That would be like the minimum I would want. But I'd also hopefully have a hi-hat mic and then at least 1 room mic, hopefully like a stereo pair for the rooms. So that would be my minimum setup there. And I try not to go overkill at all on drum recording. I'm a huge proponent of just less is more. So that definitely goes with drums. Like, I'm not a guy who's going to put 3 mics on a kick drum when it's like, fast technical metal. Like, it's just stupid. So there's my answer on that. Adam saying, what does your mix bus generally look like these days? So I've tried a few different things, Adam, over recent years, but man, I've got such comfort in the old SSL bus compressor. That's usually like my go-to. So it's just the SSL bus compressor doing like a little bit of compression, a couple dB. And then after that, I do use the Slate FGX. I've used that for a number of years now. It's really not doing a ton, but it's just like getting it slightly up towards that kind of more finished mastered loudness. And that's kind of just to help me know what it's going to sound like after mastering. But I actually do kind of lean on it a little more these days and actually start having it doing a bit of gain reduction. But we're not talking huge. I'm talking, the output is still, or like minus 13, minus 14 dB RMS on there. So that's it. On recent mixes, I have tried some other plugins like, what's the one called? The CLA, I think it's CLA Mix Bus. Is that it? And it's been okay. I've done a few final mixes with that, but I also find it was like almost, it's cool because it's kind of dirty, but it's almost like a little too dirty sometimes for me. So it gives a lot of aggression. It almost feels like you're kind of having like an old school analog kind of gritty console on there, which is great for like aggressive punk stuff, stuff that you want edge. But I found like for my mixes that I wanted to be a little more like pristine and clear, it wasn't as preferable. So honestly, man, I'm like, again, I like to keep things pretty simple. SSL bus compressor and the Slate FG for some loudness and dynamic control, and I'm happy with that. Okay, when you're recording instruments or a vocalist, do you edit and tune while you're tracking, or do you do your edits after the recording session? Okay, good question. So these are kind of like different. So recording instruments, it's kind of different for every instrument. So with drums, I'll record the drum tracks, but I'll edit them before I record anything else after that, because the drums have to be locked in before you go and track like guitar and bass and all that stuff. Otherwise, you have a massive mess on your hands. So recording the drums, you can't really edit those as you're going. So recording the drums, and then I'll like put the best parts of the takes together, and then I'll edit those and quantize those, finalize that before moving on. In terms of guitar and bass, I cannot say firmly enough, you must get the tuning right and pretty much all of the tightness of it during tracking. Do not use any of these bogus plugins that are trying to tune your guitars after the fact. It's going to not sound good. Even if you think it sounds good, it's going to like be your tone. Once you try to mix and stuff, the tone is going to be all messed up. So don't try to tune bass or guitars after the fact. It will not work well. And also, even with performance and stuff, don't try to edit the guitar and bass after either. Like I pretty much do almost no editing on guitar and bass after it's tracked. It's all about getting that right in the tracking stage. And that means I guess you could say I'm editing as I go along. So if we have to split up a part into little chunks in order to get it tight and get the tuning right, then I'm doing that, and I'm editing it on the fly. So we'll record the first chunk, we'll record the next. I'll be editing those and crossfading on the fly, moving on to the next part, stuff like that. In terms of vocals, it is mostly done after the fact, but obviously I'm, again, always trying to get as tight and as close as possible during tracking with vocals. And whatever we don't get, then I tighten up, tuning-wise, timing-wise, nudging things around a little bit maybe. And tuning-wise, obviously, eventually after the session's over, on my own, I'm going to tune all the vocals by hand and align all the backups and stuff like that. But at least after we track the vocals, if we're continuing to go in the session, I'll throw on auto-tune just on auto mode, just so we're hearing something that's closer to the finished record, and then I'll go in and do the editing after. So hopefully that answers your question. It's kind of different, but depending on the instrument, but that's basically my workflow in a nutshell there. Sean, thoughts on the CLA 10s? I don't know, man. I think it's really cool that they made them. I hope they sound good, because that's good news for everyone if they can get their hands on those and they do the same thing as NS10s. That's awesome, because mixing on NS10s has really improved my mixes. So I don't know. I haven't heard them. I haven't used them. I think it's cool that they're making them. I don't know if anyone here has used them or owns them. You could chime in for sure. But I love my NS10s, so if the CLA 10s are similar, then I would probably recommend checking those out. Mitch, I have actually not used the Neural DSP amp sims. I don't really do a lot of work with amp sims. Nothing against them. It's just most projects I'm working on, I'm mixing, so I'm not really like dealing with getting the guitar tone these days. And when I was more doing tracking, it was always with real amps, or the only amp sims I really used were Kemper and Axe Effects. So I guess I've heard good things, but I don't have any personal opinion. Leviathan is asking, are you still mixing on a regular basis, or have you transitioned to other endeavors? I would say I'm mixing, but it's not on like, I'm not doing a ton of it. And I'm super grateful for the place I'm in now, where I really hustled for many years recording and mixing in the studio, paid my dues, put the time in. And, ever since I started just making videos and courses and teaching people that, it's, man, that's taken up a lot of my time and a lot of my passion. I absolutely love seeing, the results that people are getting from these. Even just people are watching these YouTube tutorials and saying they're learning more from YouTube. I just talked to someone the other day who said they learned more from binging my YouTube channel than from paying tens of thousands of dollars going to school. And that's like super fulfilling to me. So a lot of the mixing I do now is like with the goal of doing it to teach others. I did mix a album for the band Auras last year. So it's kind of at the point where it's like, you know what? This business teaching online, I love doing it. It's going well. I like helping other people with their businesses, start businesses online as well. So I do a bit of that. And then if there's a cool mixing project that comes up, like that Auras album, or, someone maybe I've worked with before, or someone who's, pretty established band, then I'll throw in, I'll do one of those maybe once or twice a year. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, man. Josh, okay, so Josh is following up on my previous comments about not mixing on a guitar bus. So he's saying, isn't it more work to double up on the same plugin on each guitar track? It's not more work, because in Pro Tools, you can just put the same plugins in the same chain, and then within your group settings, you can just have it set so that if you adjust a parameter on one plugin, then it's going to copy to the other one. And so like your plugin settings are actually grouped on those two tracks. The reason I do that on on individual instead of on a bus is because I like to have lots of easy control over the tracks to automate. So that sometimes means maybe I have my main left and right guitars, and then I have like a lead or a layer guitar that's coming in over here on the right side just for this course. And so I might want to take just the volume. I might just want to turn the volume of the right rhythm guitar down when that extra layer is in, and then turn it back up when that layer disappears. And it's just easier to do that if I have two separate faders. I might go even further than that. Maybe in the similar scenario, I might not turn the volume down, but I might actually automate the EQ to, let's say, make more room in the mid-range on that side so that that other guitar layer can come in, and then the other one, it can come back when it's done. So stuff like that, I just like to have control, and I often find myself having to do these little differences in automation, whether it's EQ and tones or just volume with the rhythm guitars, which is why I just do it on separate tracks. All right. This is awesome, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out, by the way. I will try to get to as many questions as I can. I can't believe how fast this is going. Jonas is saying, hey, any insight on recording a nice tight vocal in a less than ideal small medium room? So a nice tight vocal in a small room is okay. Man, the number one tip is don't use a condenser. If your room is not treated, if it's got some bad room sound and some echo or whatever, you want to make sure you're using a dynamic. And I love this guy right here, the SM7, because a dynamic mic is very, to be very directional. You can be right up on it, and it's not going to be sensitive to picking up all of the low level room tone and room sound and reflections that might be happening. So definitely use a dynamic mic, and that doesn't mean it's not going to sound as good. I've owned, U87s and, worked with a bunch of expensive condenser mics, and I got rid of them, and I just record all my vocals with this thing. So there you go. That would be my tip there. Sylvia, what's your approach if you get too harsh or nasty cymbals? Too harsh or nasty cymbals, I'd probably just try to soften it with saturation would be my first thing. So I'd probably look at like tape emulation plugins. I love Tapehead. It does a really good job of softening up nasty high end. So I'd try like the Massey Tapehead or some other like tape tape emulation plugins that can kind of saturate and kind of soak up some of that nasty high end energy. You kind of got to work with what you got. I mean, cymbals, it's like you can't be like cutting out the high end of cymbals because it's harsh. Like you need high end of cymbals, right? So I would probably just try some saturation there. Cut out any nasty like specific narrow frequencies if they're there. But generally just try to work my best with it. Probably not really boost it at all. Maybe I might try to take, I did a video on this years ago, guys, but it's talking about turning weaknesses into strengths. So sometimes if you get something in the mix that is like, just you can't fix it, like it's dirty or it's harsh or it's messed up, you can actually like overcome that by taking it even further. So if like, man, these cymbals, these drums are like really nasty and harsh, depending on obviously the vibe of the record you're working on, if it fits, but maybe you take it in a bigger direction. Like you actually like do some parallel distortion on the drums and you make, the whole drum kit sound really aggressive and dirty like that. Like, so sometimes you gotta like, if you can't fix it, you might as well, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them, right? So sometimes you can try to turn those weaknesses and issues actually into like a defining characteristic of the record. Okay, GT free business question. Let's say I have a solid portfolio and the skills necessary to produce a solid record. How do I find potential clients and or get paying clients to approach me? Step one, you got to make the first move. So if nobody knows that you're looking for artists and bands to record, then no one's going to ask you to record them, right? So first is just having the boldness and the guts to just put yourself out there in any way possible. Certainly online is the easiest way. Start showcasing that portfolio, make sure you're sharing that wherever you can. And sometimes you just got to ask, like, sometimes you do have to go out and approach bands and send emails and maybe follow up a few times and go to their shows. And, maybe if you're really having trouble getting anyone in, maybe you offer some free work, one free song, just to get them in the door and start to make that happen. I know there's a lot of people from within our members community who have done that. And now they're willing to take the short-term, do the short-term work of doing a couple free songs for bands. And then their career just goes way up. So hopefully you don't have to do that for long, but like really it comes down to taking action. And everyone who's looking for more clients, it's taking action. I find a lot of people, they think that just because they have the skills that people should come to them and notice and know that they're ready to record and looking to record. But you have to take that first step, and you have to let people know that you want people to come in and become your clients. And a lot of people just have this fear of actually putting themselves out there because they don't want to get rejected. But if you're going to let that hold you back, you're never going to get anywhere. So it really, like, there's no magical tips. Really, it's kind of just simple. It's the simple principles, right? It's like, there's this book called The Slight Edge. It's like the slight edge concepts. It's just like showing up every day, putting yourself out there every day, and doing the necessary work. If that means getting people in for free for a little bit, do that, or for really cheap, and then just, jump on whatever momentum you can and not quit. Thank you guys for some of the positive comments here. Okay, I apologize, guys, that I won't get to all your questions. I'm trying to just look at the ones I can provide the most helpful advice on. Like, there's some amp sim questions. Again, I haven't worked with amp sim plugins a whole lot, so I don't have the best answers, but we'll keep going here. Okay, Null is asking, what are the ways to put vocals inside of the mix without reverb and delay? Often vocals jump out of the mix on high mids and highs. At the same time, I can't dull them down without losing clarity. Okay, first thing, but because of this question, why not use delay? I think I have a video on my YouTube channel. Is it on my YouTube channels or just in my courses? But it's like, I think it's a YouTube video, but it's my go-to delay settings for lead vocals. And it's not like a really long delay. It actually sounds more like a slap reverb. It's just like a super short delay, and it's on the left and right. And it's so subtle, like you probably wouldn't know it's there. But that's like often the only effect I have on my lead vocal. And it really just sits it in the mix. and it's just really short. I think it's like 180 milliseconds on the left, 220 on the right, and it's like zero feedback, just like one echo on each, and I low pass filter it. And man, it just sits it in so well. I don't use really reverb very much on vocals. Usually just that delay, and then maybe some bigger delays and effects when needed. But that's kind of my go-to setting. That really sits it in. And the other thing I would say is like make sure you're using a lot of compression on your vocals. Like vocal mixing is all about compression. I've learned it's like just slam that thing. Like get the character, get the attitude, and then automate. If it's jumping out certain points, like you got to lean heavily on automation on vocals for sure. So hopefully that helps. All right. Just scanning the questions here, guys. Okay, here's an easy one. Cosmic Soup Recording is saying, do you send the band away when you're doing the drum editing, or do you do it when they're still in the studio? I've done both. I tell them, look, I got to edit these drums. It's probably going to take, well, it depends. If it's one song, I'll just say like, just hang out here. It might take me a half hour or something. If it's like a lot of songs, yeah, I guess that's how I'd answer. Is like if we're doing like 2-3 songs and I know I can get through the drum editing and then we can keep working on something else after that, then I might say, okay, go for lunch, go get a coffee or something. But I'm okay with them staying in the room. I just like if they're making noise and I can't hear properly, I got to turn around and say, hey, you guys gotta be quiet or you got to leave. If it's a bigger project, like 7, 8, 9, 10 songs, a full length, I'll probably just literally book a day for drum editing. So we track all the drums and then I'll say, hey, this Thursday here, if we finish drum tracking on Wednesday, it's like, hey guys, Thursday, it's going to take me the entire day to edit the drums before we can move on. So you guys just take the day off and come in the next day. Jay Kanan, will you ever touch on the business side for people who aren't familiar with running their own businesses yet? Billing clients, accepting payments, taxes, budgeting, etc. Yeah, so I do have some content on this. I've been thinking about putting it out again in the future. So it's good to see that there's a lot of questions about this. It might be something I need to revisit. I did have a kind of a membership program that was business focused a while back that we've closed down since then. But they're good, lots of good resources. You can check out Brian Hood's stuff, Profitable Producer. And then, maybe down the road someday, I'll look at re-releasing a lot of that business-focused content that we had. Giovanni's saying, where can we get the merch? Yes, I think I'm actually wearing my Hardcore Music Studio t-shirt too. Am I? Yes. Yeah. I'm representing Huge. I knew I was doing the live stream today. So, the answer is, man, usually this stuff, it's been a while since I've done it, but no one else has this. I just kind of did this as a test. The shirts, a bunch of guys have the shirts. I've thrown them in as bonuses for people who join my paid courses. I'll say I'll send you a free shirt. So I'll probably do that again in the future. That's kind of the only way to do it. We don't sell it individually. All right, Gabriel's got a good question here. I've read about using 3 reverbs, one for vocals, one for drums, and one for the instruments. How many reverbs do you use? So on a typical rock or heavy mix, I will have a snare. I'll have 2 snare reverbs usually. One's like a really quick gated one that makes it fatter, and then I have a longer snare plate. So I'll have like 2 reverbs just for the snare. I might have a drum room reverb if there was not a good drum room track in that recording that was provided. But that's kind of like, if there's a good room track on the drums, I don't use a room reverb. So at least 2 just for the snare. Guitars and stuff, usually on a heavy track, none. If I'm doing something that's a little lighter with a lot of clean guitars or acoustics, I might have a short reverb on that, but generally not for the instruments. And for vocals, again, I generally don't use reverb on vocals. I might have one long plate for kind of background vocals and harmonies, just to give them some distance. But generally, like I just explained, I just have that one delay. I tend to favor delays way more than reverbs on vocals. So not a lot, man. I definitely don't mix by that rule of like, you don't have to put reverb on your guitars. In fact, I recommend you probably don't in most cases if you're working on heavy music. So yeah, I am a proponent of using not very much reverb. I find that it kind of clouds up a mix. A lot of times when I hear amateur mixes, I can tell right away it's because they put reverb on everything. Because when you're mixing in solo and you put reverb on, it automatically sounds great, right? It's like the instant sweetener. It's like adding sugar to something. It's just like, ooh, that sounds nice. But then if you do that to every track, then you've got this cloudy mess of a mix, and it just sounds like there's like a veil over the whole mix. If you're having that problem, you're probably using too much reverb everywhere. It's a little bit of a tangent, but that's my answer on the reverb question there. Adam Buckley, is the Auras course still available? I'd be interested in grabbing it. Or if you got plans. Yes, actually, it is available. It's kind of like hidden. If you go to hardcoremusicstudio.com/binary, BINARY, then that page is still up. It's still available. I didn't close it down, but I'm just not actively pushing it. But yeah, I probably will kind of maybe do a special offer on it in the future, near future maybe, hint, hint. But yeah, thanks for being interested in that. Brian, if you notice a kick drum isn't as punchy as you'd like, what's the first thing you do to remedy that? So I'm doing the typical like massive EQ scooping, taking out the low mids or the mid range of the kick, giving it some low end, giving it a healthy dose of high end EQ boost, and then following that up with a compressor, slow attack, fast release, and seeing how much punch I can get out of that. The other thing that helps a lot with kick, getting more punch in the kick, is parallel compression. So having the drum bus that you're feeding the whole drum kit to, and then making sure the kick is in there, and dialing in the compressor to get a nice balance of the punch of the kick and more smack on the snare. That I definitely rely on that, the parallel drum compression track, to add a lot of punch to my kick drum. And then beyond that, of course, we're looking at samples to augment as well. Decibel Audio is saying that the CLA 10s are very close. That's awesome. That's good to hear. I'd like to hear them sometime. Andrew, favorite project I've ever worked on, or favorite project in the last year? That's a cool question. Well, the main project I did in the last year was mixing that Auras album called Binary Garden. And I'm proud of that one. I really liked the songs. When the band kind of asked me about it a year before, I heard the demos and I was like, oh man, this stuff's sick. Like I really want to be a part of that. So I think the songs are great. And they did a good job tracking it. I loved mixing it. There was a lot of variety, a lot of stuff to dig into on the mix, which I really liked. So I had a lot of fun mixing that one. And that was within the past year. So favorite ever? Man, that's a tough one. Really tough one. I don't know if I can answer that, man. I really don't. If I think of something, I'll let you know. But I feel like every project, it's like there's great things, there's things that were tough. So favorite project ever? I don't know. It's always within the context of recent history. So it'd have to be the Auras one for now. And let me think about that, if there's a favorite one beyond that. Byron, yeah. So about cab impulses and amp sims, again, not my area of expertise. I would say that this seems like not a great idea. But, hey, there's no rules. Try it out. If it sounds good, roll with it. Tate, what kind of processing power are you running on your iMac? I don't know. Let me see. I'm not a tech nerdy guy, so I don't even really keep track of this stuff. Let's see, 2017 iMac processor, 3.4 gigahertz, memory, 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's it. So it's nothing special. It's kind of like the stock big iMac, and I haven't had any problems running my mix sessions on Pro Tools. So, yeah. All right, Gabriel, how do you mix a vocal in the lower register that has most of the energy around 200 to 400? If I cut the EQ, it sounds thin. If I use a high shelf, it doesn't sound right, even if I use multi-band or dynamic EQ. So, yeah, again, hard to know without hearing it. My first thing was going to say, try some multi-band so that, when it's overbearing, you can dip it down, but otherwise it's not going to sound thin. That would be my first go-to there. Man, I would probably just end up, like you said, I would avoid cutting it. I generally avoid cutting much in vocals. I'm more just trying to bring out more brightness. So I would, definitely make sure you're adding a lot of air. That could be up above 12K. You might need a lot of 8K. You might need some higher mids too to kind of like counteract that. But eventually, like, vocals are hard because with vocals, there's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can mangle it. Like, it's not like an electric guitar where it's like taking up the full frequency spectrum and you can like really shape it so much. Like, it's kind of just like one source it's a very tight frequency, right? So yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you just got to go with it. Like, if the guy's got like a, that kind of voice, like, don't try to fight it too much because you might just make things even worse. Like, just try to do your best to maybe build the mix around it and create space for that. All right. With so many people going the DIY route, what would you say is the biggest thing you can provide to sway them to come to you if they were to otherwise go the DIY route? I think a lot of people are not going to, the biggest thing to sway them would just be the quality of your work. So really what it comes down to, man, is like, because I've had bands come in to me in the studio and they send me their demos and their pre-production and I'm like, this is really good. Like, I've had bands that come in and their pre-pro sounds like 90% like a finished record. It sounds like 90% of what I can do. But they're still willing to do it. They're still willing to come in because they want that extra 10%. And a lot of them want to learn more. If they're already doing pretty good, they're going to find someone who's better and try to get better results for one, and then also learn more. I think everyone kind of knows like that, when you're working on your own stuff, it separates you. It's very different being a member of the band in the studio recording and just worrying about that, and then being the person who's worrying about engineering the record. It's hard to do both. So you can obviously kind of point that out, but the biggest thing that can sway them is just your work. And sometimes people will be like, I want to save money. I'm going to go and do it myself instead. But it's a long-term view. But when they compare their work to what you're doing, if yours is way up here and theirs is down here, they might reconsider next time. You could even maybe say, hey, send me, that's great. If you're going to do it yourself, that's cool. Good luck. Just for fun, I won't charge you. Send me the source tracks after you're done. And I'll kind of do a mix of it for you. And you can see like if maybe it's worth, send it to me to mix after. You can maybe try something like that. All right. I'm going to try and skip down a little bit here because I feel like I'm way behind. Brian's asking a huge question here. How do you make your mixes sound pro? That's the ultimate question, isn't it? Sometimes I get all well balanced and compressed, and then I feel like it's a well mixed demo, but not a pro sounding track. So there's no way I can answer this just verbally. How do you do that? There's so many ingredients. Actually, I'm working on a new video series. It's going to be free. It's going to be really cool, like multi-episode video series, almost like a season that we're putting out in a couple months. And it's really going to dig into this. It's like what actually makes the difference between a demo quality and a pro record? What are the pros actually doing different? And there's so many things. It comes down to a few fundamentals, but there's different parts of it that don't just start with the mix, by the way. It's all the way back from tracking to editing and mixing, all that stuff interplaying together. And, a lot of kind of some counterintuitive stuff here. I will say that years ago when I had the chance to actually be in a major studio when a platinum record was being made and I watched it happen, let me tell you, what they were doing in that studio was very different from what people were discussing online and the advice that people are giving online. So yeah, again, my answer to that question would be like, I believe that, the training I put out, even on the free YouTube channel, it is going to help your work sound pro. There's a lot of advice out there you can listen to that doesn't actually make your mixes sound pro. It's just like these weird rules that people came up with. But just based on feedback from other people, man, my answer would just be like, check out all the free videos you can on this channel and keep an eye out for that upcoming video series if you're on my email list. And I hope to help you with that over the long term. It's a journey. It's not necessarily going to happen like that, but we can help you get there for sure. Just keep following along, man. Okay, let me see what else we got here. I'm down to Hangout for probably another 20 minutes or so. Okay, Mario's asking, how do you address psychological issues by like lack of motivation, self-doubt, procrastination, fears of not being good enough, etc.? Good question. I think a lot of us probably face this, especially with artistic endeavors like this. I definitely, through the years, had times where I felt like I was hustling so hard and it was like I just didn't have the motivation. So I've been there, man. I once canceled a $7,000 project because I was just like completely burnt out. I was just like, I don't want to work with this band. Like, I'm not going to do it. And financially, it seemed kind of stupid, but I was just like, I was so burnt out. I was so done. And I listened to like the demos of the band. I was just like, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. Now, going back, I wish there were things I would have changed to do that. Just have a healthier lifestyle is one thing. Like a lot of us audio engineers, I don't know if you guys can relate, but back in the days when I was really like paying my dues and hustling in the studio, I loved it. But there came to a point where I was spending like 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. And for a while, I didn't care. That's all I wanted to do anyway. But eventually it's like, man, when you're drinking iced coffees all day and you're staying up late all the time and your sleep schedule's messed up and you're eating fast food for lunch and dinner because you're working in the studio all the time, it's just like, it takes its toll just physically and mentally. So just having a healthier lifestyle, like I know it's kind of the norm, but you don't have to be like a really unhealthy person in order to do this job. Like you can just, and I was in this mindset that like bands want to work late at night and they're not going to come to me if I work regular hours, and my career is going to plummet if I decide I'm not going to record on weekends, and all that stuff just like wasn't true. Like I started making my recording sessions from like 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. and I stopped recording on weekends, and things got better. So if you're running into those, it's maybe just overall lifestyle things you need to address. At the same time, I say that with a caveat of like, and I'm not saying this directly to you, I'm just saying to everyone, is like, let's not be too soft. I think that kind of in our modern culture is like a little bit too much emphasis on like self-care and just make sure you feel as good as you can and all this kind of soft stuff, right? At some point, it's just like, man, whether the motivation is there or not, you approach your work like a professional. And there's a great book, actually, it's right back there. It's called The War of Art. I'm reading through it right now. And he talks about this. He talks about like, all of you here are already professionals. You're already pros. You're already pros in the area that you work. So if you have a day job, a part-time job, a full-time job, something that you do outside of music maybe, and you're getting paid for it, you are a professional. And so think about the approach you take to that job. You show up every day, whether you feel like it. You put in the hours, even when it's hard. You just show up. You do your work. You don't obsess or over-identify with it. You disconnect when you're done. And you take the long term. It's like, this is a job. I'm hired to do it. I'm going to do it no matter what. It's not like if you have a day job, you can call your boss and we're like, hey man, like my motivation is just kind of low and I'm kind of doubting whether I'm going to do a good job today. So, I'm just not going to come in. You can't do that. So what if you took that same professional approach and that same level of professionalism into your audio work, even if maybe you're not getting paid a lot, even if you don't have a bunch of clients, even if you're just working on your own stuff. But what if you took the same way that you show up as a professional in your day job and started showing up as a professional in your music? Think about what that would do. So yes, take care of yourself, live a healthy lifestyle, but also, man, just show up and do the work. And sometimes the motivation is not there at first, but once you sit down and you actually get in the zone and do it, things start flowing. And by the end of the day, you look back and you're like, wow, I actually did something good today. All right. Is there a way to download your online course videos if you already paid for them? Yeah, most of them within the paid members area, you can download them. Adam, is there anything left in that mug? Yeah, but it's like kind of cold now, man. Okay, here's a good one. Charging hourly rate versus charging per song. I'm going to say pretty much with no exceptions, you should charge per song. There's just so many reasons. I could go deep on this, but one of the main reasons is like when you're working with an artist and a client, the last thing you want is for the project to get cut short or rushed because the band's looking at the clock and calculating the dollars, right? So what if you're in the producer's chair and let's say the singer or the guitar player, they're just not quite nailing it, and you know that, you know, like if you just persist and you set the standard high, you're like, no, like let's keep going until we get this right. It's going to be so much better in the end. But the band's like, yeah, like we've already spent like an extra like $150 here, so like we're cool with this. Like this is good enough for us. Don't worry, you know. That sucks. Like now you're not in control of the finished product. And it's really hard to build a career when you're not in control of the finished product. Like when you don't have the ability to really push your clients and say, you know, let's do this again. We need to do this again. It needs to be tighter. I need to spend more time on this. So that's why I would always go for charging per song, because that puts you in the driver's seat in a major way. And it's just like, I don't know, it just takes away all the money part before you get in, you know, like they know how much it's going to cost. They're not going to be looking at the clock. You're not going to have to make decisions about money and time after it's already settled. So that's kind of one big reason there, but it's an important one, I think. Okay, what do you do when clients send you poorly recorded bass, guitar, drum tracks, and can't re-record it? How to understand in time that the multi-track is mediocre and mixing it is useless? Well, I would say that mixing it is, I know what you mean. It's probably not totally useless, but I've had this before, and it depends. There's a threshold, right? If it's like, it's kind of sketchy, but there's some redeeming qualities. It's like you just do your best with it, right? You have I call it a gold standard mindset where it's like, yeah, there's problems here, but I'm going to do everything I can to make this as good as possible. I have had projects where they send it to me and I email them back and I'm like, usually if it's like the drums are not quantized and they're really sketchy and the guitars are like out of tune and out of time and all that stuff. Often like the band kind of knows this. And so if you just confront it, like I once had a project where I was doing 3 songs and it was like that. It was really sketchy. And I was like, man, even after I mix this, it's still not going to sound pro because of the performances here. And I just emailed them back. I said, you know what? I checked out the tracks. Like, I can do the best mix I can here, but like, hey, there's all these other problems with it. So, it's not going to sound like, your favorite records. It's going to sound like just a little bit bigger and clearer of what it already is. And they were totally cool. They're like, yeah, we totally understand. Like, we're not looking for that pro sound. Like, we know that we're just starting out. So just whatever, do your best. And in the end, they were really happy with it. So, hopefully for me, like when you get to a certain level, you want to screen out those projects by asking for the demos or the rough mixes ahead of time. So if you really don't want to do that and you don't have time for that, you can just say, sorry, it's not up to standards. Come back next time, kind of thing. But yeah, sometimes you just need to just be straight up with the band about it and see what they think. Do you offer mix critiques as a service? Not one-off, but if you join some of our premium programs, then often there's mix critiques within that. Any tip on getting metal bass and guitar to cut through sounding tight in the mix? Yes, I do have some tips, but I'm not going to share them with you. No, I'm just kidding. My biggest tips for that is going to have nothing to do with mixing. It's going to be get it really in tune and really tight during tracking. Like seriously. And don't stack a million layers. This was a thing like 10 years ago, and it's still a thing now. Is people like, do I quad track my guitar? Should I add all these extra layers? It's like, no, if you want big, heavy, fat, clear guitars, and if you want tight bass and like big impact, then it's less is more, right? And just track it really tight, really great tuning, and that's gonna do so much more than any mixing tip I could ever give you when it comes to metal bass and guitar. So track it really, really well. That's the big thing. Okay, Dave, any suggestions on recording in a finished basement with a low ceiling? Yeah, I recorded a lot of records in a room with a pretty low ceiling. I mean, just kind of standard house ceiling, I guess. Maybe a little lower, actually. I would say just treatment, man. Well, kind of like I said way back when someone asked about doing vocals in a small room. Dynamic mics, so avoid condensers. I mean, a lot of the records I made in a 300 square foot live room, and I just treated it fairly heavily. Carpets on the floor. I had these. You can't see it, but behind my computer, there's like these whatever you call them. Geez, I don't know. Like, why am I blanking? Like bass traps, like the 2x4 panels, with the fiberglass and stuff. So I had those all around. Over the years, I tried to deaden the room as much as possible, because a small room, especially if it's an unideal shape, low ceiling, there's no good room sound there. So just don't even try. Just deaden it as much as possible, and then use dynamics. I used pretty much all dynamic mics, except for I did have some condensers for the odd acoustic instrument or whatever, and I had condensers for overheads. But otherwise, it's like everything I'm using dynamics, even vocals, because that's going to just really help you just get the source and not a bunch of the room garbage. So that would be my tip there. Okay, True Peak has been ruining my life. I don't even know what that is. I tested my master mixes on a True Peak meter, and they usually True Peak at parts, but I also test on Pro Tracks, and they True Peak too. Is it a concern? Okay, I don't really know what this is, but it sounds like something that I would just say, delete that plugin or software or website or whatever it is, and never use it again, and just forget about it. There you go. It's so easy to obsess over things that just don't matter. Like, just ignore it. Okay, Rainwater's asking, I find EQing with a hertz to frequency chart in the key of the song saves time. When I do it by ear, I end up close to the same frequency. Yeah, I mean, I would say hopefully over time, you're training your ears enough that you don't need to reference a chart all the time. The only case where I do this is with bass, mostly with if it's a really low tuned bass guitar, I will give a little frequency chart with to find what the frequency of that low note is, because when you're getting down into the fundamental is 60 or 70 hertz or below that, you're competing with kick and bass. So not that I try to mutually carve out those spaces, but I want to know okay, what's the lowest note he's going to play on this bass guitar, because I want to filter out everything below that, all the mud below that. So that's kind of the only way I do that. I never have used that approach for vocals or guitar or anything like that. Just kind of use my ears. So Hey, if it's helping, that's all right. But I think I would try to move away from that. I think generally, anytime we're trying to mix with our heads and by math and charts, it's okay to get started, but we're over the long term, you're giving up something too. So something to think about. Maybe removing that crutch eventually. Okay, Logan, question about active pickups. Do you have any advice editing the pieces together? The compression they have make them significantly harder. Yeah, I know what you mean. So I think Logan's saying like the DI track, if you're trying to look at, or not the DI, but like the amp track, if you're trying to look at where to cut, where the strumming starts or the picking starts, and you're trying to crossfade, it's kind of hard because the active pickups are so noisy. Yeah, I've had that occasionally. It's not a lot. If that was really a problem, I would probably just like make the band use a different guitar. Honestly, there was a certain point where I was just like, you know what, I'm not going to struggle against gear that's not serving the production, and we're just going to use something else. And that's why I have like a Gibson Les Paul with passive pickups, and it sounds good on pretty much any record in any genre. So I just kept that at my studio. And if there's ever a guitar like that, or the pickups were like super noisy or scratchy, or we weren't getting the sound we needed, then it's like, hey guys, sorry, like we either need to use this other guitar or try that. If that's not working, we need to go rent something else, because there's no sense capturing something that you're just going to fight with for the whole rest of the project. All right, Tate's asking acoustic guitar positioning methods to track a tight, consistent recording tone. Yeah, my favorite way to record acoustics is with a small diaphragm condenser aimed right at the 12th fret, about 12 inches away, sometimes a little more. So that's always a starting point. 12th fret, small diaphragm condenser, about a foot away. If it's too boomy, you move it back. If it's too thin, you move it forward, stuff like that. But that's like, I don't know, to me, that's what I always do. And I've tried so many mic techniques, but that's the short answer, is that's just seems to always work doing that. What do you think is a very important thing to make clear sounds of mixing? Gain stage? Nope. Compressor dynamic range? Nope. Panning? EQ? I mean, EQ and balance, but honestly, biggest thing that contributes to a clear mix is like good tracking. Like, I can't say it enough. It's having things be in tune, track tightly, hitting at the same time. That contributes to the clarity of your mix so much more than any plugin, any EQ, any of that other stuff that a lot of people tend to spend all their time on and just kind of neglect the things that will actually make a bigger difference. What would you do with a low end buildup during fast double kick spots, and alternatively frequency buildup on the snare during blasts? Honestly, I would try to just solve it the easy way with just literally volume automation. So often if I'm mixing something and there's a really fast double kick part, I'll probably just dip down the volume on the kick for that section, and that usually works. If we do that and then there's not enough definition or something, then, you can just automate the EQ, and I'll just literally have a high pass filter that I'll just like bring up a little bit during that part, like bring it up from like 60 to 70 or 80 or something, so that it's just cutting off some of that extra low end, and then just automate it in and out, stuff like that. And same thing with snare. It's usually just volume stuff, but you can also just EQ automation. You can solve a lot of problems with EQ automation. So often neglected, but something to think about. Here's an interesting question from Valerie. In which would you invest money to improve audio quality? Pre's, microphones, monitors, console, interface, plugins. Very dependent on what you have already, man. So hard to say. I would say, I'm trying to think back, like I don't know. It depends what you got already. Like if I knew what gear you had already, I could say, okay, this is maybe the weak point. Aside from investing in just knowledge, which is probably going to impact more than any of those things, if we're strictly talking gear, I did notice a significant difference in my recordings many years ago when I moved from the built-in preamps on my old Focusrite and Digi 002 to when I started using like an API preamp. That made a big difference. It wasn't super noticeable on like a track by track basis, but when you add up like 20 tracks in a mix, it did make a difference. So that, I mean, yeah, it all depends on what you got. Because then again, like if you're using kind of junky microphones, I might say like to upgrade those before. But yeah, I would say for me the big ones were the preamps and I guess the interface too. Like going from again a Digi 002, this is back at like early 2000s, to a Digi 192 with like the old Pro Tools HG systems. Again, over the cumulative effect of a bunch of tracks, I did notice a difference there. It's not the thing that took me from amateur to pro, but I'm saying it did make a difference. That said, I mean, we're talking those experiences for me were like 2007, 2008. So the Focusrite and Digi stuff, low end that I had back then is very different than the low end stuff that's out now. So I think there's a lot less difference there. Okay, 1260 is asking about scheduling, recording, and editing. I actually did answer this pretty much the same question earlier in the stream, so just swing around for the replay on that one, man. Any cool takeaways or stories from working with structures on all of the above? Interesting. Yeah, that was a crazy project. That was a lot of hard work. They were a young band at the time, so there were some challenges to overcome. The biggest challenge was the guitars they brought in were like just not good for the tuning they were trying to play in. So they were having like super low tuning, like drop G or something. And I was like, hey, we got to use really big strings, like 68 gauge or 70 on the lows, just to even have a hope of like maintaining tuning here. And so we bought these thick strings and we tried to restring them on the guitars, and it like literally wouldn't fit through like the holes in the guitars. There were these like custom guitars. And so that was a struggle. So we had to use like thin strings with these low tunings. So it was like a nightmare trying to keep it in tune. I remember spending a lot of time tracking those guitars, kind of making them rewrite a bunch of guitar parts. Yeah, so I would say that was one of those records where it's like, it was a lot of work. However, I remember like, I would not knock the band at all. I remember like thinking like, man, these songs are crazy. Like, you've listened to that EP, like the tempo changes all the time. Like it was kind of like, at the time I was like, this EP is like bizarre. Like it's like the music they've written is like so wild. And I didn't know that it was going to like blow up. Like I had no idea. People just loved it. I think because it was so different and crazy, people really latched onto it. I will say, I give a lot of credit to that band because that session took a lot of work on the engineering side, and they came back to do another single. I don't know if it ever got released, but they came back like a year or two later after like doing all this touring and stuff. And man, they had improved so much. Like the level of maturity and everything was way up. I think they learned a lot from that first studio experience. So that was kind of cool to see. I always love to see that, like, and that's why even with a young band, if I'm working with and maybe they're struggling with like playing their parts right or performing well and they're sketchy or whatever, like I'll always do my best job, and I'll not hide it either. Like I'm moving on. I'm not talking about that specific record, but just anything. Like, man, if a guitar player can't play his riff, like I'm not going to like sugarcoat that and be like, yeah, it's not good enough, man. Like we need to record this at half speed, or we need to do it, in two note chunks or whatever. And then, but once they go through that experience, like a lot of people are just afraid to do that because they don't want to offend people. But when they go through that experience, they realize like, oh my gosh, this is what it takes. And the musicians that actually care about their craft and what they're doing, when they come back again, they're going to be twice as good. I promise you. Some of them will just be like, screw this. Like I'm going to play video games instead. But the ones who actually care, they're going to come back so much better. So you actually have an opportunity to really help musicians grow, which is really cool. All right. Wow, I can't believe over an hour has passed. So my 2-year-old son is still napping down the hall. So if I hear him wake up, I'll sign off. But let's keep going with some questions because this is fun. And we'll see how far we can go here. Okay. All right, Lucky Robot Gamer. Do you see any benefit of using outboard gear when mixing? I don't see it as a good or bad. I think it's just purely choice. So if you like the experience of using outboard gear, go for it. I would say I've tried incorporating outboard gear into my mixes throughout the years, and I don't do it anymore. So, but that's because I'm someone who came up completely in the box. Like, I came up in the digital age. I didn't start recording till 2005. So I didn't have outboard gear to use. It's not like I was an old school guy who came up on outboard and, then tried to transition. Like, I was always a digital guy. So I found that just workflow wise, I like to work quickly. So the outboard gear slowed me down. I did keep a distressor for a long time because occasionally if I was sent a vocal that was let's say not compressed on the way in, then I would run it out through my distressor, compress it the same way I would have if I had recorded it, and then record that back into the mix and use that. And I liked doing that, but I don't know, honestly, the Slate distressor emulation that I have now, it's it sounds pretty much the exact same. So I'm happy with using that. So I think the benefit is just man, if you make better moves, if you make better decisions touching that thing than looking with your eyes on the screen, then go for it. I would say sonically, again, it's not the thing that's going to take you from, good to great. I think it's more a workflow and preference thing than anything else. All right. Andrew Michaels. Oh, sweet. Thank you, man. Thank you for that. Let's see. I'm going to try to. I know there's some of you who have asked questions and had them answered a couple times, and then others who have not had your question answered yet. So I'll try to get those. Let's see. How do you get a well-recorded and well-sung vocal that sounds kind of boring? Some energy in life. Oh, that's a good question. Some people duplicate a track and add a wide distortion and tuck it into the mix. Yeah, man. I would say that. That was one of my first thoughts. Parallel distortion helps. You could look at adding. Some people call it a split harmonizer, or just a harmonizer, where it's kind of just a subtle pitch and time shift on the left and right, just to and then you can filter out the low end from that. So just kind of add some sparkle only to the high end on the sides. That could help as well. So yeah, harmonizers, the distortion. And man, just friggin' slam that thing with compression. Just max it out. Don't even look at the needle. Just keep cranking that thing until you're sucking or squeezing every drip of energy out of that vocal with a compressor. That's probably actually maybe my number one tip. The compressor can proper compressor. I have a video about this. If you look at how to mix screaming vocals, I don't know if you're talking about screaming vocals, but the exact same principle applies. Check out that video, how to mix screaming vocals. It'll show that compression in action, and you'll see how using compression a certain way on a vocal can just make it sound like they're singing twice as hard as they actually were. Josh says, do you have multi-track sessions and stems for mixing practice? Yes, I do. It's called Session Vault, and it's generally not on offer outside of my email list or outside of being bundled in with some of my other courses. So I would have to say I don't have an easy website address for you to go to, but yeah, it does have 40 multi-tracks in there that you can use for portfolio building and practice. And just stay tuned on my email list for the next time I offer that. Thank you guys for the kind comments in here. Do you compress any drums during tracking? Generally, no. Well, when I was tracking drums in my old studio, I had a distressor. I would sometimes compress the snare drum, especially if I had a nice consistent drummer and they hit the same kind of every time, they're consistent. Then I know that I can actually like shape the sound predictably with a compressor. I would use my distressor a little bit, not a bunch, but like, a couple dB to add some attack on the way in. Another scenario would be if I recorded drums in a bigger studio that we were renting out and they had some cool outboard gear, I would maybe set up like a really distant room mic and then kind of just like crush it with some compression. We did that on Silverstein Records for sure when we went to other studios. So I like that, but generally that's pretty much it. Pretty much don't compress anything else aside from those scenarios, but I'm happy not to do that too. I'm happy to just track without that. Jim, do you add any type of stereo imaging to either individual instruments in the mix, the overall mix, or the mastering process? No, I don't do mastering, so I can't speak to that, but I experimented with that throughout the years, and it's not something that I continue doing. Don't really do that in my mix. Okay. When a client hires you to mix, would that service include any editing or vocal pitching, or would that be separate? Yeah, that'd be separate. I wouldn't even do it at this point. If it needed it, I would send it to like one of the assistant mixers that I'm connected with, and I would build that into the cost of the project and get them to do it for me. But yeah, guys, if you're getting clients that are paying you to mix, like you shouldn't be editing for them. Like that should be over and above. Mixing should be mixing. Editing would be a separate service. Braden, what are your opinions on the Axe effects? Okay, by the way, guys, I know I can't answer everyone's questions. This has been awesome. I think we'll probably cap this in about 10 minutes. What are your opinions on the Axe effects? It's okay. I haven't loved it. It's been a number of years since I used it, but I used it on both Intervals albums that I did and a couple other ones too. I never was stoked on it. I think that the Kemper sounds way better. The first time I plugged in and played a Kemper and heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a real amp. I never felt like that with the Axe effects. Like the Axe effects always sound and felt like a digital amp. So again, we're talking at least 5-6 years since I recorded with one. So take it with a grain of salt. So I don't know where they're at now, but I do love the Kempers. I thought the Kemper was better than Axe effects. I just do. And yeah, I thought it was just too digital sounding, too harsh, low end kind of wonky. And I also really didn't like the experience of using it. So I'd go to the guitar player and be like, hey man, I just want to like tweak like the treble and or like how do I just like EQ this like a normal amp? And he'd be like going into all these menus and like, oh, you can move the mic and you can do this. It's like, I don't want to do any of that stuff. Like I just want like, I guess I was a real amp guy when I recorded real amps when I started. And, I just want to like plug it in, set the gain, set the low, set the mid, the treble, and like figure that out. And that's it. So I really hated the experience of like the complexity. There's way too many knobs and settings on the Axe effects, which I didn't like. So anyway, all that to say, I made some records with it that I'm happy with. But it wouldn't be my first choice. Do you ever clip your SSL EQ plugin to get that magic sound? Yes, I definitely have. I would say I probably don't clip it on purpose. Well, I probably have actually in the past clipped it on purpose. I don't think it's that amazing when it's clipped, but I think it's more like sometimes I'll mix and I'm mixing fast and like I'll notice like, oh, my SSL plugins are like clipping a little bit and I'll just leave it. Like I won't even change it. So yeah, it's kind of usually happens not intentionally, but generally if it's not sounding bad, I'll just leave it. Yeah, so there's a lot of tips about amp sims here. In a world where there are 100,000 amp sims, any experience? Yeah, honestly, plugin wise, I can't say. Hardware wise, I love Kemper, so that's all I've got to say. Plugin wise, I honestly don't know. Drums for freaks. I track my drums between -12 and -18, which is giving me tiny waveforms. How come when I look at every drum recording tutorial, they all have nice and spiky waveforms? Well, I mean, I can just press a button on my keyboard to zoom in the waveforms and make it look bigger, so you never know what the zoom is. But you don't have to record that low, man. I mean, there's like, I've done videos on this before, but like the amount of like crazy insanity that everyone has about gain staging and recording digitally is like, it's just nonsense. Like, who cares? Like, I didn't track drums that quietly. And like, I found it a pain when I got sent those tracks. I would just gain them right up because like, I want to have some audio to work with when I start putting the plugins on, you know, I want to push stuff a little bit. Like, we're not making classical music here. So just start tracking louder, man, if you want to. It's not going to like, I don't know. Again, it's even you're in this question are focusing on something that doesn't really matter. But I would say, yeah, you don't have to track at -18. Like I would have my drums peaking like loud, like especially depending on the gear. Like I remember I used to have API preamps that were really hot and they were going right into my interface. And I would have the pad on and the gain at 0 and some drummers like hitting the snare really loud. And it's like, it's literally like hitting like -2. Like it's so close to clipping every time. But it's like, I literally couldn't turn it down any more than that. But this is fine. It's fine. I would say I normally record hotter than that, like trying having the peaks up, I don't know, -6. I don't measure stuff like that. If it's hitting like around the green where the green turns to yellow, like cool, you're good. Of course, don't have it clipping. But like, it's just ignore all that noise about like this gain staging stuff. It's completely overblown. It's complete nonsense. Wherein I struggle with getting my mixes to sound wide. I played against other tracks. I find my mixes collapse down and not sound as wide and open. Do you recommend stereo with plugin or stereo bus EQ? Not stereo with plugins. I think that's gonna mess with things a little more than not. I find like, I don't know. It's interesting. Like width is not something I ever really worried about. Of course I want stuff to be big and wide, but to me it's just like contrast. Like contrast is everything. So make sure you're not panning everything like by little degrees. Like if you're just having like your main elements up the middle and then your guitars left and right, maybe a couple other things left and right, not having things like in between, that's going to help. Yeah. And maybe when you're thinking wide and open, I'm thinking, okay, is there too many layers? Is there too much happening? Do we need to strip back some of the layers so there's more clarity in the individual tones? It sounds like more separate and wide. I got to be honest, though, I think a lot of if I listen to records I've done, I'm like, oh, that sounds like really big and wide. I'm thinking like Troy, my mastering engineer, Troy Glessner. I feel like he always made my stuff wider. I don't think he used any like imaging plugins. I think he would like separate the middle from the sides, and he would like just add certain tiny bits of like EQ or something and process like the middle and the side a little bit differently so that it like, I don't know, it just sounded bigger and louder. But that's like mastering stuff. I don't really do that. It's a little bit of a mystery to me, but yeah, it's not something that I really focused on the width. I'm just focusing on getting a good clear mix that hits hard and sounds good and gets you bobbing your head. It's not something I ever really obsessed with, but hopefully there's a few ideas for you to try there. Kevin, how do you be sure you're tracking good stuff? Sometimes I feel like the tones sound good enough, but when I compare to other tracks from pro records, the difference is huge. Yeah, totally. I think a lot of people can relate to this. Certainly this was my problem for a long time. The hard answer, but the true answer is like, how can you be sure you're tracking good enough stuff? Your raw tracks in the tracking studio should sound like 80% like a finished record. Now, I know that's maybe sometimes hard. Let's say if you have a drummer who's like barely hitting hard and you know you're going to have to do a lot of work later, a little bit of a different story, but at least when you're talking about like guitars, bass, if your bass tone, your guitar tone doesn't right away, like with no processing at all, just right off the board, rough mix in the studio, if it's not sounding like pretty close to a finished record, it's not good enough yet. and you got to keep dialing in that tone. So keep working at it, keep referencing. You can get to a point where, you know, I eventually got to a point where it's like, I pretty much with rhythm guitars, it's like I'm not EQing at all in the mix. It's like the tone is the tone right off the amp and the mic. So you will get better over time. Just like, it's kind of just not settling. Like a lot of people settle. It's like, you know, you twiddle the knobs for like 15 minutes and it's like, this is pretty good. I hope it will work. Let's just go for it. Versus like, you know, really making sure it's sounding good and not moving forward unless it is. Good question though. Appreciate that. Okay, guys. I think I got to wrap it up. Let's see if I can find one more question. Okay, this is going to be my last question, guys. This was awesome. Thank you so much for you guys coming out to hang out with me. It was cool. And it was legitimately like, I was like, man, I haven't published a YouTube video for a while. I apologize for that. I was like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what video I should make next. And so I was like, I'll just show up and answer questions. How about that? So, but obviously that's not going to happen unless you guys actually care enough to show up. So, super grateful for all of you following the channel, showing up today. Really appreciate all of you. So last question, have you listened to newer records by bands you worked on? Did you enjoy the production? Counterpart, Silverstein. Yeah, especially so the newest Silverstein record, this is so cool, guys, was produced and mixed by, it's not out yet, but I think there's 3 songs out. You guys have to check it out. I forget what the album's called, but the newest one, the singles are awesome. There's a song on there that I don't think is out yet that is like so good. But the guy who produced and mixed that, he's in Toronto here. His name's Sam Guyana. I think I said that right. But he is actually one of the first people to buy my first mixing course like 4 or 5 years ago. And it's like, it's a crazy story because that first mixing course, it shows you how I mixed a Silverstein record. And then like 5 years later, he's producing and mixing a Silverstein record. It's like, it's so cool. Like, it's my favorite story ever. And he absolutely killed it. I think it sounds amazing. I think he, like, first of all, the production ideas on it, it's like, it's almost like the band is like reinvented in a way. It's like, I feel like it's going to reach a whole new group of fans. The songs are really cool, but yeah, the mix and the production on it is just stellar. He's like, for me, like production, especially heavy records, it's like trying to hit that sweet spot between like, things are really tight. It's really played very well. It's produced. It's very polished, but it still sounds like a rock band. It doesn't sound like a computer or like a robot played it, right? It's finding that sweet spot, and he like nailed it. The sweet spot, like exactly. He nailed it exactly. I think it's like, it sounds absolutely top notch, but it still sounds like a real rock band playing their instruments. So whether you're into the band or not, check it out. Because it doesn't even sound like their old stuff. It's like almost a totally new genre in some ways. And it's really good. Sam did a great job. I actually want to get him, once the album comes out, get him to maybe do an interview on this channel, because yeah, the story is just so cool. Just how he came up from that and our connection together through the years. Actually, even before he bought my mixing course, he came into my studio and we recorded drum samples together and made drum sample packs. And yeah, he just kept working at it, kept his head down, kept recording local bands. So cool. So I had to take that opportunity to shout out Sam and get you guys to check that out, because it's really, really good. It would be a great track on your reference mix playlist. Okay, guys, I know there's more questions, but I got to wrap it up now. This was great. Thank you again. And yeah, drop comments and questions and stuff so that I know what video I can make next on this channel, and maybe we'll do this again soon because it was awesome. But make sure you're subscribed, join the email list, because we got some really cool stuff coming up. I'm going to have, again, like a really cool video series, kind of Netflix style thing for all you guys coming up. So can't wait. All right, guys, thank you again. See you later.